Today we're going to be taking another look at the legendary tier French cruiser Henri IV in a tragedy befitting of a king. I think Henri IV actually was a king. I think that's where the ship gets its name. Correct me in the comments section if I'm wrong. But if any historical tragedies ever befell the real Henri IV, I don't know. This, of course, is a tragedy contained in a game of World of Warships Legends, and you've probably seen similar things before. We're going to attempt to analyze why this tragedy unfolded so that you, as a player watching this video, might be able to avoid or prevent a tragedy from befalling your team. World of Warships Legends is, of course, a team-based multiplayer online game, and while one individual ship captain certainly can have an outsized influence on the outcome of a battle, that captain is still going to require their teammates to do something at least halfway useful. And usually that'll involve playing their ship to its strengths. My teammates, by and large, are not going to do that. And the specific problem I'm going to suggest to you as the culprit for why this game turns out to be the tragedy that it does is primarily due to the positioning of the blue battleships. You see, this is an affliction that grips the World of Warships Legends community like no other. The, let's call it, battleship main syndrome. There are, unfortunately, a lot of people who sort of misunderstand the role of a battleship. At least I think so. You can tell me if you think I'm not quite on track in the comments section, but it seems to me that most battleship players view their chosen class as one that is designed to push straight forward into the enemy and then sit there bow tanking. Bonus points if you make sure that you cannot get all of your guns on target and only use the front two turrets. This, to me, seems to be the thing that battleship mains think about above and beyond everything else, when in actuality, the battleship is a very useful unit to have on your team if it positions correctly. And by positioning correctly, what I mean is if you are playing a battleship, it should be your goal to be nowhere near your battleship teammates. You do not want to be in the same grid square as them, certainly, and you don't want to be facing the enemy from the same angle. Instead, you want to spread out your battleships in order to get crossfires. You want to think to yourself, where can I put the battleship on the map to access the broadsides of the Reds, whether the Reds are cruisers or other battleships. You don't want to sit in the same place. But you can see that as my team deploys, that's exactly what they're doing. We've got two battleships next to us in the exact same grid square, actually hiding behind these islands. Meanwhile, we have what appears to be the vast majority of the enemy team sailing toward the Bravo cap. We can see a Borgonia inside of it, and we keep intermittently spotting, I think that's a Schlieffen. They've got two other battleships behind them and two cruisers that are heading this way. Possibly because I'm here playing the Henri, and, well, nobody actually has this ship at the moment apart from the World of Warships Legends community contributors, and I am, of course, one of those. So I think this is partially new ship syndrome that explains the rather interesting deployment of the enemy team coming all to this side of the map. And, well, if my two battleship teammates were positioned a little bit better, we'd be able to take advantage of this. Only one of them really needs to be over here where I'm at. If the other one was, say, more south of the Alpha Cap, perhaps toward those two islands near the western side of the cap, there would be a degree of separation between him and the other battleship behind me. And from there, while these guys, this Conqueror, Borgonia, and Schlieffen, angle against the battleship that we can see on the screen there, 6.8 kilometers away, while they angle against him, if the other one, which is directly behind me, is more toward the right of the screen, well, then he has their broadsides. And actually, he looks like he's about to head that way, right? He looks like he is going to actually go out to try to get a crossfire. The problem is he's lost too many hit points, and he decides at the last moment, instead of turning right there to continue to separate himself from our teammate hanging out by the islands, instead he's going to turn left and go bow in to the enemies. This is really not going to do anything. Meanwhile, teammates on the other side have actually performed quite well. Because the entire enemy team is on this side of the map, my teammates have managed to push through the Charlie cap, flip it, and sink the enemy destroyer in the process, which theoretically should give us a huge advantage over the Reds. And we even have an advantage over positioning. I mean, take a look at the position of the destroyer and the battleship in the Charlie cap. Theoretically, if they continue to push in the direction that they are, then eventually they're going to get the broadsides of these battleships and cruisers that are here in front of us. We've kind of just been hanging out the whole time as these guys push in, just dealing damage with our high explosive and trying not to get shot in return. In retrospect, I almost wonder if I could have been a little bit more aggressive. After all, the Henri does have 30 millimeters of armor plating, which can bounce the shells of every single battleship we're facing, aside from the Musashi. Perhaps the Musashi was the reason I was so hesitant to push in, but in any case, this flank seems to not be going well for us. The Borgonia, who is sitting bow into a Conqueror, to nobody's surprise, is melted down and sinks. That leaves the final friendly battleship on this side, who is still hiding behind an island, using his front two guns to continue to shoot at the Conqueror, and meanwhile the Conqueror's teammates have given up, and they've decided to go back to the Bravo cap, which honestly is probably the right decision. But you can see that we've lost 3 battleships thus far. And I think this is primarily because, and I don't want to sound like I'm ragging on my teammates too much or like this loss is completely not my fault. Everybody bears at least a little bit of responsibility on the losing team. But I think if my battleships had deployed more strategically and attempted to create crossfires, we would have had a better chance at this. Instead, the 2 near me sat in the same grid square the whole time, and so the enemy team could angle against them. And the ones that went over to the Charlie cap sort of followed the destroyer in sort of an old-fashioned, real classic battle line where they were all in single file. That might actually be a true naval tactic that worked back in the days of World War II, but that's not what this game is about. And so most of them are dead. In fact, we only have 1 battleship left now that the Schlieffen managed to sink the Montana. Schlieffen's actually on quite low health. We've still got a full health Musashi pushing in, and that Conqueror is busy dealing with the last remaining battleship who's all alone over there to the east of the Alpha Cap. It's just the destroyer and a cruiser left near the Charlie cap, and you would think that having this destroyer, especially a Sumner, would provide a huge advantage, but no. The Sumner gets taken down by the Schlieffen, and I can only assume that that is because the Sumner wanted to get torpedoes, and he forgot that the Schlieffen has that German sonar, probably got spotted and taken down by the secondaries. That, unfortunately, leaves just 3 blue ships left. Well, I almost spoke too soon. 2 blue ships left alive myself, and the final remaining battleship that spawned near me. The enemy has entered the Charlie cap. They're going to flip it. Take note, though. We talked a lot about the battleship role throughout the course of this game, but we haven't really discussed the cruiser role. The battleship is supposed to go out there and get crossfires because it is capable of dev striking other ships across the map. Primary target for the battleship is the cruiser. Well, why is that? That is because the cruiser, in my mind, is the support class. And what I mean by that is it's the cruiser's job, depending on what it is, to provide its teammates with support in the form of utility through consumables. So that would be like radar cruisers or cruisers with sonar, detecting torpedoes, finding enemy destroyers, that kind of thing, or else to provide support with its firepower. Cruisers have really the highest damage potential out of the other classes. They tend to have the highest DPM and they deal a lot of damage over time, whereas battleships sort of deal burst damage with their main batteries. Destroyers do the same sort of thing with torpedoes, although there can be destroyers that also have a lot of DPM through the guns. But the cruiser's job is primarily to deal as much damage as possible and support its teammates. Primary target for the cruiser is destroyers, next is other cruisers, and then finally battleships. So you need your battleships to sort of secure map positioning in the form of creating crossfires. You need your DDs to scout the map in order to reveal the position of the enemies, and you also need them to assist with map control with their torpedoes and their positioning as well. And then the cruiser's job is to pour on damage and use its consumables for the utility of the team. Therefore, the cruiser becomes most valuable the longer it can stay alive and with the more HP it has. Note, when we were down to 2 ships and there were 5 minutes left to go in this game, we had about 100,000 damage done. And there's still about 4 minutes left to go with a number of enemy ships. My battleship is actually drawing all of their fire right now, but since he's one guy versus 4 ships, he's not going to be surviving for too long. It doesn't really matter what your ship is, even if it's a battleship. If you take sustained focus fire and you can't avoid it or mitigate it from this number of ships, well, you're going to go down. But this does give us an opportunity to perform our role and support that battleship by pouring on the damage to these reds. We're going for the Musashi first and foremost because he strikes me as the most dangerous. Most likely he can overmatch the battleship, and he's got a terrible crossfire on him. You can see that battleship in Bravo is still dealing with one red battleship that we can't actually see. He's south of the Bravo cap, and he's just taken out that battleship, so we're the last ones left alive. Meanwhile, Minotaur and the other enemy cruiser both decide that they want to give us broadside. So we're going to use the Henri's excellent AP to try and get the citadels and maybe take these cruisers out. Unfortunately, the Minotaur is a smoke cruiser, so he smokes up, he hides I think it was a Des Moines following him. He hides the Des Moines, he hides himself. We can't see either one of them, but we're still spotted, so the Minnow can get his AP spamming DPM on us, and we really can't hit him reliably. We're getting a couple blind shots in there, but they're ineffective, and we've got 4 ships left to fight, so seems to me that the better choice is to deal damage to a target we actually can see. We switch back to the HE, start firing it at the Musashi. We're up to 193,000 damage done right now, so this kind of shows you the value of a cruiser with a lot of damage output, and why it's so dangerous when it's left alive near the end of the game with still a lot of its HP intact. We spent 10 minutes racking up 100,000 damage in the first part of this game, and we got another 100,000 damage in the final 5 minutes. Imagine if our teammates were still alive and still able to provide us with assistance in the form of shooting at these red ships. We'd be able to deal an awful lot of damage to them, and so long as we weren't the priority target, if we had a couple other battleships left alive, maybe this game would have gone quite differently. But you can look back, and you can criticize my positioning. Perhaps I should have played more aggressively to begin with. Perhaps I should have gone to the other side. I don't know, but the leaderboard seems to suggest that I did everything I could, and ultimately, this is a team game. You need your team to think a lot more about their positioning, especially if they're playing battleships. That's my message for you today. Hope you enjoyed the video. If so, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.